Hey, Fidelity. What's it cost to invest with the Fidelity app?
Start with as little as $1 with no account fees or trade commissions on U.S. stocks and ETFs.
That's music to my ears.
I can only talk.
Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Zero account fees apply to retail brokerage accounts only. $0 commission does not apply to customers designated by Fidelity as a professional equity trader. A limited number of ETFs are subject to a service fee of $100. See details at fidelity.com/commissions. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC, member NYSE SIPC.
Ever wonder where Tropicana got its name? The tropics. And every time you enjoy a glass, you're not just drinking juice. You're taking a trip. Stepping into sunshine and embarking on a flavorful journey into the tropics where ripe fruit is crafted into wildly delicious juice. And the best part? No passport required. Tropicana. Give life some juice.
United connects you to more of the world than any U.S. airline, and United for Business can get your company where you need to go. Whether you're growing a business or managing travel for thousands, they offer solutions to fit your needs. Track expenses, create reports, and manage traveler perks. Plus, employees earn Mileage Plus miles while your company saves on travel. Get started with no minimum spend or flight requirements. Visit business.united.com/podcast.
Welcome to Tragic Hollywood. I'm Natalie.
And I'm Paige.
Today we're talking about Karen Carpenter, and she really wasn't supposed to be the star. When the Carpenters first formed and when they were gaining attention, the musical focus was on her brother, Richard Carpenter. He was this genius behind all of the composing, all of the musical arrangements. He was the source of a lot of the creativity. And, Karen was the drummer and, it eventually realized that she had this phenomenal voice with a lot of melancholy and uniqueness about it that really set her apart from so many other singers that were, big in the 1970s. And, they ended up becoming, with Karen at the front, one of the biggest acts of the 1970s and 80s. And it's so sad that for what she's remembered for now is the tragic way she died.
When I asked my mom, because I've known of the Carpenters and Karen Carpenter for, a long time. It was not a new story to me personally. And so, of course, I reached out to my mom and I was like, Mom, we're gonna talk about Karen Carpenter on Tragic Hollywood. And we watched this documentary, of course, as one of our ways of researching and getting in our understanding of Karen and the Carpenters. It, by the way, was called Karen Carpenter, Starving for Perfection.
Mm-hmm.
It's available on
Prime
for rent on Prime. And she was like, oh my goodness. And what kind of made me sad is that even during the Carpenters' heyday, my mom mentioned they were so talented. The documentary says this as well, but they were so different than what was being played on the radio. So to be honest, outside of when they had their visits to different, late night talk shows and TV-based performances, such as there was a Bob Hope,
Carol Burnett,
but they did lots of different, again, late night talk shows or celebratory television events, if you will. And, always enjoyed, my mom always knew how talented she was. And you knew the songs because my mom was they were on the radio, but was she buying the albums and whatnot? No, because again, they were so different than what was being played in the late 60s through the 70s, all the way to the 80s, like you mentioned. It was very much, especially in late 60s and 70s, very much, at least before disco, very much a counterculture, given the political instability in the country at the time. And it being a wartime, it was a lot of counterculture, very psychedelic, very rock and experimental. And they weren't. They were ballads. They were soft.
And perhaps we could look at the Carpenters as counterculture because they really were like the siblings next door. They were very polished, very innocent almost.
I asked my mom if it felt like that at the time. And she said, oh, yeah. Like I go, did it feel a little bit, I go, I don't know if I want to say dorky, Mom, because they had talent. Not that dorks don't have talent, but you get what I mean. Like there was a professionalism to it that was
There wasn't
worthy.
any edge.
Yeah, just something without any edge. And she goes, yeah, like we picked up on this she goes, they seemed very sheltered, very, very sheltered. And we all knew that that's the type of family that they were coming from. We all appreciated their talent, but yes, very sheltered. And they weren't out there in the tabloids dating, having, a drunk night where they threw a glass at a paparazzi person. Like they didn't have those missteps or those moments. It was very structured and sheltered.
Part of the reason for that is the family dynamic, primarily their mother, Richard, and Karen's mother, Agnes Carpenter. She had a very strict household. She wanted things to be done a certain way. She looked at Richard like the golden child, and Karen was sort of this afterthought. And she wanted to keep them together even beyond their teenage years. Like she wanted control over them in a way.
Yes, they were kept together and very single, well past what you would think of. She wanted to keep the kids together as if they were a family unit at 15, 16, 18 years old, still like in high school, still under that same roof. And this goes all the way up until Karen's untimely death, where she passes at her parents' home in Downey, California, where they were raised. And that room had Mickey Mouse and other Disney paraphernalia, if you will, and was childlike in that way.
We're not saying she's like a Disney adult. It was just like there was Mickey, but there were other stuffed animals. Like you said, very childlike, very failure to launch sort of vibe.
A failure to launch sort of vibe. And I think that this is perhaps why both of them kind of struggled in love, unfortunately.
And they struggled with their health in different ways too. We do know that it's, long been in the news now that he did have a struggle with Quaaludes and sought treatment.
And gambling as well.
Karen very famously succumbed to her eating disorder.
I think a lot of that comes from the shelter and the structure. It was just a pressure cooker, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
That's where this the whole idea of starving for perfection came from. There was no outlet to be out of control or have a misstep. Now, the family was from Connecticut, but when Karen was about 13, which Richard would have been around 16, 17, the family moved to Downey, California, which is where they went to high school and, continued to grow up. Obviously, 13 is quite young, so she effectively, grew up between the two states, but effectively the final adolescent years were in Downey. And that's kind of where the Carpenters are known to mostly be from, I think, because of the ages and as they were kind of coming to fame of sorts, that's what was kind of popular at the time too. It was like, the whole 60s from California, the whole beach thing. They were kind of coming out of that as the Carpenters were coming to rise when they were signed to A&M Records in 1969 after they had been discovered.
That's why they made the move right from Connecticut to California, because the parents knew, and they've said it a few times in different interviews and in Karen's own words, they knew they couldn't do much beyond what they had already done for Richard's career and, them as a duo in Connecticut. They knew they had to get closer to the music scene. And by moving to Downey, California, they realized, okay, they would still have that suburban family feel, but also be close enough to Hollywood where, they would be making these contacts and be able to make their music.
What I think is super cute is that Karen, who loved playing the drums and singing and had favorite drummers, she was into it.
And she was good.
She was very good. Karen and Richard actually were both, this should come as no shock, they were in a local production of Guys and Dolls. And then from there, she's, learning performance. And while it did make her nervous, I mean, there was just no fighting that she was a born pop ballad singer. She created a little band. And I don't want to trivialize it by calling it little, but I guess it just didn't last forever. So maybe that's why that came out that way. But it was called 2+2, and it was an all-girl trio from Downey High. So again, with Downey really still being very impactful, despite, being 13 when they finally moved there. But they did split up after one of the moms didn't allow one of them to attend this first gig, to play the gig. And so it just wasn't really working out. But I could just see we're younger teens, we're going to have a band, we're going to be famous. And then the mom's like, no, I'm not comfortable with you doing that. The end.
And I think that's such a testament to the time, because what we do learn about Karen and the drums in particular is that it was very uncommon for a woman to be on the drums.
Yeah.
And so the fact that she would pursue this instrument in particular was a big deal. And it was sort of unusual. And I could see maybe that mom thinking oh, right, this is a little too risky or risque for the 1960s.
And also were they even driving yet? It's great for you guys to play in someone's garage, but I'm not going to take you all over LA to do gigs and you have school tomorrow. And I would love to hear from
where would that girl have been if she would have stuck with it, right?
But I also wondered too, what's the true story about why was it no? What was, all the reasoning in that moment, examining it as an adult with that member of 2+2. Regardless, by 1969, when Karen was 19, and this is really when the world gets to know her, and this is truly where I think the documentary just does such a great job of not harping on younger years too much and really kind of getting to the meat and the potatoes of, for example, getting signed with A&M Records in 1969, where she actually used to do most of her vocals straight from behind the drum set. And then obviously she took center stage later, but
there's a recording of her voice from an interview. We don't see the footage of it in this documentary, but she does talk about how, later on down the line, when it is just the Carpenters, when it's just her and her brother, they realized that because she was the lead vocalist, she had to be out front and center on stage. She could no longer hide behind her drums. We can see this discussion and her acknowledging the fact that she was, for all intents and purposes, hiding behind the drum set as the tip of the iceberg of this self-consciousness that surrounded her the rest of her life and her career. Because, first she was hiding behind the drum set when she had to go out and be on the stage with nothing to hide behind except holding a microphone in her hand. That's when she started focusing on what her body looked like. And everything sort of devolved from there.
She was also just a tomboy. She loved softball, and her best friend was her older brother, and not that those things inherently make you a tomboy, but she was a tomboy. So I do wonder too if did she want to be in those dresses in center stage, or did she kind of have to and would never say no to Agnes, her mother?
Speaking of Agnes and the pressures that she put on Karen and appearances, that sort of thing. There's this clip where Karen and Richard are on a talk show and the host says, "And your parents are here." And the parents come out and, they hug, whatever. Agnes does something where, as a person with a 2026 lens, I was watching it thinking, oh, interesting. Agnes pulls out Karen's baseball mitt and a baseball and hands them to Karen and says, "I brought you your mitt." And you can see by the look on Karen's face that she is mortified and embarrassed. And it was almost like Agnes wanted to find, maybe whether subconsciously, consciously, a way to put Karen in her place of like, this is you. You are the tomboy. Your brother is the true star here. You know what I mean? Did you get that vibe? It was very weird.
Retracted into the chair.
And then she hid it. Hid the mitt behind her.
And it reminds me of that eye roll we see in a later scene of Karen where she's being questioned about her anorexia, and it's on a London-based show, and she's being questioned about getting down to a certain weight. And we're going to pick back up on this scene later, but she does this eye roll, and I'm like, there's that side of Karen. There's that side of Karen right there that almost like retracted into that chair, but it was underdeveloped at the time of the retraction.
Yeah.
To now she's in her 30s or late 20s-ish 30s, and she's given that eye roll, but she still can't say what she means, and she's using body language instead. And it just was like, oh wow, that's that same side.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I also don't want to get too far into this without saying, as a child of the 90s, that it instantly reminded me, and it was brought back up in the research as well, but that scene from Tommy Boy with Chris Farley and David Spade, where they're in the car and they're just singing and weeping, "Don't you remember you told me you love me, baby?" And I was like, oh my gosh, I remember that scene, and they're just weeping, because that's the kind of talent, by the way. Like, I have chills thinking about that song. It's called Superstar, by the way, if you're not super familiar with the Carpenters. Like, that's the kind of emotion she could evoke. I mean, in her beautiful alto voice, like, just, you've got Chris Farley and David Spade using that song to kind of make these two characters connect and start weeping, because she could do that with her voice.
They were a lot of people's guilty pleasures because, like you said, this was the time of like rock rebellion, and they were a little bit more square. And even though they had this like dorkiness to them, they, like you said, were able to reach down into everyone's hearts and lungs and get them singing and feeling what they were feeling with these very raw performances. There's a comment that someone made in this specific documentary where someone says, they do acknowledge that the Carpenters didn't write their music, their lyrics. They would often find songs. But the interviewee says something along the lines of, they were always able to take a good song and make it a great song.
Yeah, they did tons of covers, and you forget that it's a cover.
Yeah, they covered a Beatles song on one of their first albums, and a lot of people thought that was a risky move, but they just knew what they were able to do, like with their arrangements and with their voices, to make it unique and different.
They made it their own. And I think that's the difference between like just covering or like taking a song and updating it to 5 to 10 years later, you know, like they were doing with the Beatles songs and like any of the other covers.
Look, if there is one thing about me, it's that I hate waiting. Hold music, triggering. If it was a person, they would definitely be blocked. Earnin, on the other hand, would not be blocked. Earnin is an app, not a bank, that allows you to get up to $150 a day, up to $1,000 between paychecks. Tips are optional, and standard transfers take just 1 to 2 business days with no mandatory fees. Expedited transfers start at $3.99 and cap at $5.99. 5 million people are already using Earnin. Time just feels different when you're not waiting around to make moves. Getting paid twice doesn't make money scarce. It just feels that way. And with Earnin, it doesn't have to be like that. If you think about it, it is kind of odd that we have to wait to get the money that we've already earned, even though we live in a world where everything is instant access now. I don't know. Now that I've thought about it, I cannot unthink it. Download Earnin on the App Store or Google Play. It's spelled like earning money without the G. Type in The Murder Diaries under podcast when you sign up. It will really help our show. Earnin is a financial technology company, not a bank. Access limits are based on your earnings and risk factors. Standard cash outs take 1 to 2 business days with no mandatory fees. Expedited transfers available for a fee. Tips are voluntary and don't affect the service. Available in select states. Terms and restrictions apply. Visit earnin.com for full details.
Study and play come together on a Windows 11 PC. And for a limited time, college students get The best
of both worlds.
Get the Unreal College Deal. Everything you need to study and play with select Windows 11 PCs. Eligible students get a year of Microsoft 365 Premium and a year of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with a custom color Xbox wireless controller. Learn more at windows.com/student offer. While supplies last. Ends June 30th. Terms at aka.ms/collegepc.
Where is Daredevil?
I'm right here. Don't miss the return of Marvel Television's Daredevil Born Again.
So what's next?
I feel liberated.
We're gonna take this city back.
Over medicated.
In an all-new season, now streaming only on Disney+.
They're hunting us. It's time we started hunting them.
I can work with that.
This should be tons of fun.
Marvel Television's Daredevil Born Again, now streaming only on Disney+.
This episode is brought to you by Fox One. Watch all 104 matches of the FIFA World Cup live in 4K for just $19.99 a month with 3 days free. Build your own multi-view, choose up to 3 streams, and follow player spotlights. Stay on top of every moment with live stats, highlights, and instant replays. The FIFA World Cup, streaming live on Fox One. Offers are subject to change. See fox.com for complete terms and conditions.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. You know those friends who support your preference for podcasts over music on road trips? That's the energy State Farm brings to insurance. With over 19,000 local agents, they help you find the coverage that fits your needs, so you can spend less time worrying about insurance and more time enjoying the ride. Download the State Farm app or go online at statefarm.com. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
While we're talking about this ability to evoke emotion and make things their own and like personalize their music to them so well, one of her favorite songs was I Want to Be in Love. And we're talking about, Chris Farley and David Spade pretending these characters are being, that emotion is being so evoked that they're weeping. This song was so personal to her that she said, like, it's my favorite song, but it even upsets me some nights on stage. And that's how badly she wanted to be in love. I mean, one of the first paragraphs of the song, or whatever you want to call it, one of the first stanzas, is the hardest thing I've ever done is keep believing there's someone in this crazy world for me. That way that people come and go through temporary lives, my chance could come and I might not never know. And after she says that in an interview, she reiterates that first stanza by memory, by the way. Mm-hmm. And she goes, yeah, and the first stanza or whatever is blah, blah, blah. And she says exactly what I just read. And after that, she goes, it's so true. And so it's like, that's what she was feeling throughout her 20s, getting closer to her 30s and wanting to be in love and wanting maybe to be in control of her own life. Sorry, Agnes, rest in peace. But
that's probably why the song hit her so hard, is because her music was a way that she was able to access and tap into that emotional vulnerability, because she was so stunted by her mother. And, she, like we said, she passed away at her parents' home, living there as an adult. So I could see why these, lyrics would really touch her, is because, like, she was able to feel them or openly express them for maybe the first time.
Yeah, and like what an outlet for her to have, right? I mean, they so often say that like actors and musicians, like performers, they need to find performance or they will like implode practically. I want to touch back a little bit on this like dichotomy within herself that Karen had between growing up and being sheltered. Her home, when she got her first apartment, was gorgeous, apparently. So says a longtime friend. But they mentioned that like it also had Mickey Mouse, like we mentioned. That was also in her bedroom growing up in Downey. But she also had like Raggedy Ann and Andy dolls. And so it's just interesting. She had this like brand new apartment, was a successful artist, and this is what she's like decorating her apartment with, right? But she also had that perfectionism that we keep touching on that was still very prevalent at the time of her, decorating said apartment. And there was a part of an interview that struck me, and I just have to quote her once again in this episode, that we spend 24 hours a day wondering if our product was good enough.
Mhm.
We spend an awful lot of time trying to achieve perfection as close as we can come. And that's not that easy. It's a full-time job. And what I'm hearing here is not just somebody who has perfectionism. I'm hearing somebody who almost believes that it's achievable if you work hard enough. And that could not be further from the truth. Obviously, as we know, there is nothing that is perfect. It cannot happen. Right. And so that's what kind of struck me here too, and it kind of made me sad, is like, she's talking about how hard they work to achieve said perfection, when it's like, what is perfection? And it makes me wonder also, what was perfection for her?
I wish we could ask her.
Me too.
What she saw as perfection. I would say, as a listener, some of her very early albums, her Christmas album, are pretty close to perfect to me.
Yeah.
Obviously, they're classics for a reason. I think before Mariah Carey and maybe Michael Bublé became the faces of Christmas music, the Carpenters had that title.
I mean, yeah, Merry Christmas, Darling. Like, Christmas is starting outside of Mariah Carey. When you hear Merry Christmas, Darling, like, it's beautiful.
It's done. Yeah.
It's done.
Or not, it's done. Yeah, like
you're done.
It's here.
You're done.
Christmas is here.
It's here. It has come. But it makes me sad too, though, because just quickly referencing that quote and into this idea of what like beautiful, practically perfect albums, we have, like that Christmas one, is it's really clear that yes, music was her job, but it's almost like she saw perfectionism as what was the full-time job. Because like even in that quote, it's a full-time job, and she's not talking about the music. She's talking about trying to make said music perfect. So it's almost like she sees the perfectionism as that full-time job. So when you're hearing these things in these interviews and you understand the trajectory of her life, it actually makes sense. You don't really have a lot of questions left as a bit of an outsider of her life.
As we're talking about where Karen's life ended up, obviously we have to talk about what was called the Slimmer's disease at the time, anorexia nervosa. At one point, she got down to 77 pounds. And as you can imagine, she was extremely frail looking, ill, and a lot of people were worried about her.
They mentioned her teeth starting to protrude a little bit. A loved one that was interviewed on the docu that we watched, and that can happen with severe anorexia nervosa. That's kind of a telltale sign, actually.
Something that I caught on while we were watching that documentary and just looking into Karen's eating disorder is it's often referred to as anorexia is what she had, but we do learn that she was taking Ipecac and vomiting up after she would eat. So she wasn't just refraining from eating food. She would find ways to, purge it.
If you're like me and you're not familiar with Ipecac until you just heard it, as Natalie mentioned, it does induce vomiting, and it's not meant for consistent use. It's to maybe avoid food poisoning or something of that sort. It's an extreme option, and it can wreak havoc for a while in your system. So you cannot use it.
It's not for
regularly.
Prolonged use. It's meant for emergency situations, and she was using this daily for years, it sounded like.
And that was a secret of sorts that she abused that, but that did definitely come out, especially after her death. What's sad is that before her death, she was hospitalized, was being tube fed, gained 30 pounds. So let's say she got up to 107 or more pounds, and she actually seemed to have been doing well. She did want to get better. She also filed for divorce. And there's a reason why Natalie and I haven't talked a lot about her marriage, because it was from 1980 to like 1983. It didn't go that well. And I think it's safe to say that, Karen hadn't found her person, and which makes me so sad for her. And there just wasn't a lot that was expressed about it or was found out about it in our research. But again, we do know that she did get married around 29, 30 years old in 1980 through 1983. And it's at this time, as she gets better, is finding herself a little bit again, being tube fed, gaining 30 pounds, that the divorce was filed, she started recording again. She wanted to maybe go on a summer tour. That was on the horizon. So things were starting to look up.
They were starting to look up, but then we have this, marriage that breaks her heart because it just starts unraveling. He's not a kind man to her. He's not who he said he was. Thomas Jane Burris, who's, the man that she ended up marrying, he was a real estate developer and presented himself to be, somebody who was really wealthy. And he had said when they met that, oh, I have no idea who you are. And she even mentions in an interview, oh, really? You don't know who I am? Where have you been the last 10 years? So it was refreshing, but also shocking to her that this man didn't have any preconceived notions of who she was. And unfortunately, the marriage collapsed and he got really mean. At one point, they're out to dinner with her family and they get into a fight. And Thomas storms off and says, you can have her. And that sort of was the end of the relationship because he was basically wiping his hands clean of Karen, their marriage, and anything else that came along with it.
Yeah, and there's no doubt that would have hurt her. And I think coming out of the hospital and kind of trying to find herself again, looking towards, again, like maybe like a summer tour or what have you. But I can't help that, like processing that hurt and pain. And remember, this is the divorce filed. It doesn't mean that it was finalized at that time. We see her at the Grammy reunion event in January 83, living her best life. But
that's her last public appearance.
That was. But again, at this time, she's processing something as painful as this divorce. So, it's no shock that unfortunately, we kind of do get back to some of our old ways with Epicac and probably restriction. And she ends up collapsing in the kitchen of her parents' home on February 4th of 1983, which she was just shy of 33 years old at the time.
Her death was ultimately attributed to complications from anorexia nervosa, which had severely damaged her heart. And, that's why she ended up going into cardiac arrest. And again, it was so unexpected. She had actually had plans to go to lunch with Olivia Newton-John that day. And Olivia was driving up to the restaurant when it came over the news that Karen Carpenter had passed away. And that's how she learned that her friend, her dear, dear friend who she was meeting for lunch, had passed away. And it just shows how unexpected it was, how quickly the news spread. And, this is before TMZ. And how many people were left just trying to piece things together after she passed away.
In the autopsy report, it says that she was pronounced dead at 9:51 a.m. So it would have just been hours before Olivia was arriving at the restaurant. It also goes on to say that, in my opinion, the immediate cause of death is hyperosmolar coma. Now, that is obviously, as Natalie said, directly related to as complications of anorexia nervosa. It gets complicated when you're talking about death and immediate causes versus, other related causes and all of that.
She was slowly dying. She was slowly dying. And this
exactly.
It became too much for her body to handle at this point.
Exactly. The autopsy report goes on to say the decedent is a 32-year-old female with a reported history of anorexia nervosa. The decedent was last known to be alive this morning when her mother heard her activity in the kitchen of their residence. The decedent's mother entered the kitchen at approximately 8:50 hours, February 4th, 1983, and found the decedent unresponsive on the floor. Paramedics were summoned, responded, and initiated CPR while transporting the decedent to the hospital. The decedent was admitted to the emergency room of Downey Community Hospital, where life-saving efforts proved to be of no avail. Death was pronounced at 9:51 to 4:83 by Dr. Edwards. The investigator viewed the decedent at Downey Community Hospital. Close examination revealed no indications of trauma or foul play. Miss Tomlin relinquished a vial of Ativan 2 milligram tablets, which she stated was found in the decedent's clothing. The medication and the decedent were transported into the FSC. Clothing, red jogger suit, released to a friend of the family per request of Evelyn Wallace, who says she was the secretary to the deceased. No additional information known by the investigator at this time. End autopsy report. So it sounds like she collapsed in the kitchen, and there were multiple factors that because of her anorexia nervosa, her body was just giving up. Like you said, she was slowly dying. And then we've got medication we're taking. We're possibly purging with Epicac. And I think Suzanne Summers says it best, though, Natalie, when she says 2 deaths happened that day. The death of Karen and the death of that act. And that act was life to both of them, in reference to Karen and her brother Richard and how important the Carpenters and being the Carpenters together was to them.
It was such an important act to him because obviously it was what helped him establish his career as a musician, but it also was his baby sister that he lost. And it's been something that he has been able to reconfigure in recent years. He has conducted an orchestra playing Carpenter's music. He's redone the music to play it. And I think what a special way to see that his sister's legacy lives on in modern times. And it is really interesting to hear the music nowadays because it feels so modern and so like it touches you still. Even though this music is from the 1970s, 1980s, it still has a way of accessing your heart and tapping into your emotions. And it's nice to know that he's still able to work with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Another cause of death, by the way, in relation to Karen is the emetine cardiotoxicity due to anorexia. So again, a lot of different causes surrounding the anorexia. And what I think is powerful about this news coming out about Karen's death is that even Carney Wilson mentions, and this is, I guess what I'm trying to say, a bit of a legacy that Karen is leaving behind for those that may be suffering with an ED is that, and Carney Wilson puts it so well, is that as she was suffering with bulimia, she realized when Karen died that it could kill you. And that is when and only when Karen died, she realized that it wasn't just a way to get slim and maybe it wasn't that comfortable. It can kill you. And I think that that's such an important part of Karen's legacy of all of these different causes are surrounded by this anorexia nervosa. And you also mentioned the music that Richard is still playing. And I think that Karen is still playing in her loved ones' hearts because Olivia Newton-John, by the way, could barely get a word out in her interview without tears. And she wasn't the only one, by the way, who was emotional speaking about her. And she said, she's a great girl and I miss her. And this is all those years later. Now, unfortunately, Olivia Newton-John has since passed, as has Suzanne Summers in recent years, very recently for both of them. But they were involved and it was wonderful to hear their voices again.
Yeah. I think Karen's story feels uniquely heartbreaking because she achieved almost everything that someone who pursues her career wants. Yeah. Money, success, Grammy Awards, fans. And yet she spent so much of her time searching for approval from her parents, approval from audiences. She wanted control over her sound, control over her body, and happiness. And, the saddest part is that she died so young and wasn't able to really ever get any control or approval or maybe even any real lasting happiness. It's a tragedy all around, but the silver lining is that people are learning from her story about the real impact of these EDs.
And they're still enjoying her music.
Be sure to follow us on social media at the Murder Diaries Pod. We're on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe there because we're hoping to start posting full-length episode videos.
Until then, we'll be back tomorrow with our DocuFile segment, Thursday with coverage of a true crime case that needs your attention. Thank you so much for being here. Bye.
Look, if there is one thing about me, it's that I hate waiting. Hold music, triggering. If it was a person, they would definitely be blocked. Earnin, on the other hand, would not be blocked. Earnin is an app, not a bank, that allows you to get up to $150 a day, up to $1,000 between paychecks. Tips are optional, and standard transfers take just 1 to 2 business days with no mandatory fees. Expedited transfers start at $3.99 and cap at $5.99. 5 million people are already using Earnin. Time just feels different when you're not waiting around to make moves. Getting paid twice doesn't make money scarce. It just feels that way. And with Earnin, it doesn't have to be like that. If you think about it, it is kind of odd that we have to wait to get the money that we've already earned, even though we live in a world where everything is instant access now. I don't know. Now that I've thought about it, I cannot unthink it. Download Earnin on the App Store or Google Play. It's spelled like earning money without the G. Type in The Murder Diaries under podcast when you sign up. It will really help our show. Earnin is a financial technology company, not a bank. Access limits are based on your earnings and risk factors. Standard cash outs take 1 to 2 business days with no mandatory fees. Expedited transfers available for a fee. Tips are voluntary and don't affect the service. Available in select states. Terms and restrictions apply. Visit earnin.com for full details.